So far, I have had a change maker's journey. A lot of doubts were involved in that journey, as well as a lot of fear, but also full of excitement, especially when I see the results of this work to individual people, to their communities, their families, their countries. Life happens to us every day. Every single moment of the day, we're confronted with a choice. Should we keep things as they are, or should we change them for the better? If we choose to keep things as they are, then we assume to live in the ordinary. We assume to have a passive life. We become passive observants of the events, of the circumstances of our lives. We sit around and complain. We have no control. Even broken systems we cannot fix because we feel that we have no ability to do that. The best thing we can do is duck and hide and wait for everything to go over us until we go back to the status quo. We even think sometimes that whatever happens to us or to our countries is a result of external forces that are orchestrating it. What a life. No present, and definitely very limited future. It's a life of scarcity. On the other hand, if we choose to change our lives for the better, we assume to live in the extraordinary, full of an inspiration of improvement, often a disruption, definitely not a comfortable place to be, because we are now the leaders of our lives. We are the creators of our lives. We dream, we create, and we move and live what we have decided to. So we can no longer be victims of the circumstances because we are the ones who shape the circumstances. And we create such an abundance so that the competences of ourselves as well as of our community flourish. And that's what a leader does. How? Well, leaders, are not really feeling comfortable in the status quo. They ask a lot of questions. They are feeling uncomfortable with problems, so they try to resolve problems. But they don't resolve specific problems, but they create a whole new system. So if you, for example, are hungry, they will definitely not give you fish. But they will also not teach you how to fish. They will change the whole fishing system. So you will be fed sustainably yourself and your family. They create changers, drive changers, so that their momentum of change can remain. Are they afraid? Of course they are afraid. They're humans. But they learn how to get free of fear. Now, what are the elements that allow us to combat fear? Of course, the fact that we should be operating out of possibility and not out of reason. And the reason is that reason bounds us to what we already know and not to what we don't know today, but we may learn tomorrow. So abundance comes out of the space of possibility. Scarcity comes out of space of fear and reason. But in addition to that, a leader has the extraordinary ability to create an attractive story, a why we need to involve ourselves into the change. In my case, in the 90s, I was an extremely young professional economist. I started working at the World Bank. It was a huge awe and respect that I had for that organization. It was the key international development organization, and I was part of it, together with extraordinary professionals, academics, people that had worked all their lives in countries with crisis, the best and the brightest, Those people had written books and articles, and I had studied them when I was at university. So I was in my dream job. Can you imagine, a young economist right there? And then I felt a little bit worried that maybe I may not measure up. So I had to really concentrate and work hard. And I did two things. I listened really hard, and I tried to understand, how did these people create policies for countries? Why did they choose specific policies versus alternative policies? Why some countries are better implementing some policies more smoothly than other countries do? But there was one additional persistent question I had. Why some countries are poorer than others? And I just sat back and thought, actually, it's not poverty we should be talking about. It's informality. Because the world of informality is a world where we live with very little means. It's a world of doubt. It's a world of insecurity. It's a world where we cannot prove easily what we have. We cannot prove our home easily. We cannot prove our job. We can sometimes not even prove our own existence because maybe our ID cards are misspelled with our names misspelled. And that generates vulnerability and, of course, exploitation. So you have very expensive lending happening. If there is some bank lending, it's expensive. Usually we have usury that thrives. Child labor is thriving as well. Trafficking, all sorts of trafficking, and even terror. The ecosystem of informality incubates have-nots. And we, traditional economists and regular people, call all this ecosystem the poor. But the poor call themselves the informals because it's not that they are not willing to have a better paying job or they are not willing to declare their homes and their ownership of their homes, but it's this super bureaucracy, the procedures, the steps, the unpredictability that makes them feel that it is impossible for them to have formal property rights. And this world that I am describing to you is 70% of the globe. 70% of the globe is informal, which means that 30% of the globe is formal, which means that the minority is formal, not the majority. And for that majority, the traditional economists, I found out when I was at the bank, we didn't have tools to deal with it. We called it the informal market or the gray market or the whatever you want to call it, the poor if you like. But we had no tools. So I plunged in and decided to get into that challenge and understand fully what does informality mean, create tools and methodologies to transform it, and I committed myself that I'm going to have at least the World Bank to accept that informality is a problem. And the transformation of that informality can only happen with the key ingredient of property rights. And I was 23. And I had a new idea. And I had zero track record. And I had the audacity to believe and to suggest that we should change the system of property rights in countries that had it, for better or worse, for several centuries. This was not a suggestion that was fitting the status quo of economic development, which the World Bank was part of. My immediate boss thought that every time he would listen to me, I was coming out of left field. I started feeling that I may be risking that dream job of mine. And of course, there was no budget for it. Do you think that the World Bank would have given a budget for this idea, whatever it was? Of course not. So I had to raise money on my own, which I did. And if I wanted to push this further, I realized really early on, I cannot do this alone. So, talking with the Japanese government representatives of the World Bank, they accepted to fund the first implementation of this reform in one country that we started working with, Peru, in Latin America. Talking with senior professionals, senior economists at the World Bank, they were also extremely excited, not those only from the World Bank, but also from the academia and other universities. They were very excited to participate actively in shaping this work. And that became their project, their team as well. It was what embarked into an extraordinary change with monumental results. And all of that because of the why. The why was that we are changing that property rights system for us to have unbound prosperity for countries that are stuck with no expectations. The results? In Peru, we had about 60% poverty. That this work helped reduce it to 20% in less than 10 years. We started with 100,000 formal, and then we now talk about 17 million in less than 10 years. Child labor was reduced over 30%. Investments, savings, inflation, investments, all of this was part of a change before our eyes where we moved from the ecosystem of informality and the poor to an ecosystem of middle class. How magical that was. Were we happy about it? Yes. But was I afraid about it? My gosh, was I not only afraid, I was terrified, and I was always trying to figure out ways sometimes to quit. Was I pressured and sometimes even bullied to stop this? Of course. 3 major opposition powers. One was those who didn't really believe that change happened, so these were the benevolent opposition. The second one was from the special interests, you can imagine. They would do everything possible to stop me from continuing. And the third one was the terror groups, because the terror groups were losing their clientele from this insecure kind of informal sector. But what kept everything going was, of course, my fresh energy. I was younger, fresh energy, but also, and the enthusiasm, but also the fact that this story was bigger than me. The why was bigger than me. There was no egoism there. It was bigger than even the team that was working for it. Transforming the poor and the informal into middle class. How big is that? That's a universal change. And it is that momentum and that energy that would not allow me to quit and anybody else. So every time I wanted to get out of that circle, they would pull me back in. And anytime somebody else wanted to go out of that circle, I would pull him back in. Today, I continue disrupting through entrepreneurship. Along other change makers, we created Thought for Action, a transformation machine for countries that needed and required and wanted. We are a safe space that produces the attractive why. And those countries, we've worked with more than 30 countries, those countries that thrive are the countries that have leaders that are conscious of the change and the why. Those countries that fail are the countries that have leaders that are completely sipped into that cynicism and they don't want to change anything. They just want to hold their positions. Now, I'm going to ask you Tunisians and you people from SFax, which camp do you want to participate and belong in? The cynical, full of scarcity camp, or do you want to be in the abundance and possibility camp? I'm going to ask you to look at the power inside you, create an attractive why, find a leader, create a leader, become the leader or the follower of a leader, and create a winning team and stick with it. Stick with it. Do not stop at any impasse or any moment of fear. I promise you, you'll have plenty. And when you will start winning and when you will start having results, these fears are going to be bigger and the impasse is even bigger. I will only remind you that Thomas Edison, who created the light bulb, we have plenty of them right now, he only tried it 1,000 times until he actually got to the light bulb. He didn't finish, he didn't stop trying, not even in the 999th time. And in the words of Alexander the Great, man's immortality is not when a man is immortal. Winning moments of fear is what makes man immortal. And it is therefore in our hands, in your hands, to decide and choose if you want to have a life, a community, and a country of abundance. Thank you very much.